Okay, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone, wherever you may be around the world. My name is Colin Dennis, and I'm a member of the British section of IFT, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar on sustainable food supply chains, challenges, and opportunities. And by way of introduction, I just wanted to say a few words about IFT and indeed the British section. As I'm sure many of you know, IFT is headquartered in Chicago and currently has in excess of 12,000 members around the world. So with such high numbers of members, there is really a need for local, which are the sections, and specialist or the divisions, to have these groups to build communities which can contribute to the vision and mission of IFT. And today's webinar is very much in line with those visions and mission. The vision being a world where science and innovation are connected and universally accepted as essential for improving food for everyone. And of course, that is then supported by our mission, which is all about connecting global food system communities to promote and advance the science of food and its application within the food system. And we believe today's webinar is very much in support of that vision and that mission. And the British section is just one of the communities outside the US, which is proud to provide a connection to the European community. And also, I want to emphasize that we work very closely with the UK's IFST to foster international collaboration between our professional institutes. But for today's topic and to our two speakers, it focuses really on topics which are related to transforming our food systems to promote a more sustainable and healthy planet and people. And the format for the webinar will be that I shall introduce our first speaker, and Ziynet will then speak. And then I'll introduce João, and he will speak, and we'll conclude with time for, hopefully lots of time for your questions and discussion. So firstly, Dr. Ziynet Bos from the University of Florida. Ziynet is Assistant Professor of Sustainable Food Systems Engineering and a very active IFT member and volunteer. Indeed, Ziynet founded and chaired the Sustainable Food Systems Division and also has served as chair of the Packaging Division. Her current research focus is very much around today's topic of measuring and monitoring food loss and waste, optimizing and modeling food systems, and evaluating the sustainability performance of various food system activities. And she's very much an advocate of applying systems thinking to the food area. Ziynet is also a previous Fulbright scholar and a very committed educator. So we very much, Ziynet, look forward to your presentation on, as you've called it, the road ahead, collaborative approaches to food sustainability. So please, over to you and welcome.
Thank you, Colin, and IFT British section for this invitation. It's such a great privilege for me to speak here. I think there's only a few divisions or sections that I haven't get in contact with, and I'm glad that we got to do this today. Can you see my screen? I hope my screen is visible.
It is, thank you.
Okay, perfect. So yes, and I will be talking about some of the collaborative approaches to food sustainability today. And I'm currently in the Sustainable Food Systems Division of the IFT, as Colin said. But currently I'm joining from my institute, University of Florida, and I'm also affiliated with the Global Food Systems Institute as part of the University of Florida. First of all, we know how complex our activities have become in our supply chains, but this is actually no surprise to us because the whole earth, the globe is actually facing these complex challenges. And then I'm sure most of you have heard of the planetary boundaries, and then they have just published their update on the planetary boundaries from the Stockholm Resilience Center. And then you can find the reference there. But we actually now have crossed 6 boundaries beyond their critical limits. And then that tells something that shows that our anthropocene, which is the human-related impacts, and then this new era of the globe is actually changing how we do things, and it's creating some irreversible changes in the climate. So some of them are, of course, like novel entities, biogeochemical flows, nitrogen, phosphorus flows, and climate change and land system change. And when you look at these graphs, I think one point that we can obtain from this is a lot of these impacts and boundaries are related to our agriculture and food system. So because of this, food systems plays an important role. And I like showing these numbers because I think it summarizes this current situation that we're facing in the agriculture and food system. But 70% of the freshwater use is due to agriculture and food system activities. This is huge. And then more than 26% of the greenhouse gas emissions are due to waste. And last year we passed 8 billion people in November, actually, 15th of November. So it's just a little over a year. But we will reach almost 10 billion people. And then we keep talking about 2050, but I think the situation is much urgent than just thinking about 2050. But yeah, so we are facing with these challenges, as well as a huge number of food loss and waste, because if we spend a lot of resources and natural resources and labor and all these capital into producing food and then delivering food, then wasting more than 30% of it is not acceptable. It also corresponds to 8 to 10% of the greenhouse gases. That's why professionally I like to work on these integrated issues such as food loss and waste at this point. But we talk a lot about also sustainability. So a lot of these issues are related to sustainability, but is it just a buzzword? So when I had the idea, or when I basically introduced the sustainability division to the rest of the IFT community in one of the virtual conferences that we had, annual conferences, first, couple of questions were asking about, okay, is sustainability a buzzword? You're a small group, how can you actually come up with solutions as part of this? So there were so many people asking question about it. So how can you actually create something like sustainable food systems, because it's such a huge topic and it's hard to chew, right? But when you look at the Sustainable Development Goals, you'll see that those goals are also ambitious. Because it involves several perspectives. So it involves the one that we are most dealing with as part of the IFT, professionals, responsible consumption and production, but also zero hunger. But there are also all these issues that are related to our activities happening in the food industry. It can be a result of quality education, or it can lead to clean water and sanitation issues, or because of the lack of clean water and sanitation, we may have issues related to food safety, right? So everything is actually connected, even though these sustainable development goals are separate, they're actually very well connected. And one of the reasons people also think that sustainability is a buzzword, I think in the food, not just food industry, but agri-food industry or overall professionals, I think we haven't been doing a great job of explaining it or demonstrating the real value of it, right? So that's why measuring and evaluating sustainability becomes a critical part of what we're doing in the food industry. And that's why it's important to also develop capacity and then develop professionals, continue engaging with them. And also, let's not forget about greenwashing. And then this could, because of the growing interest on sustainability, there are also people and then the organizations, or maybe knowing or without knowing, using greenwashing to further the campaigns and other corporate goals. But also thinking about the benefits and then how to communicate the benefits, not only those case studies that are related to greenwashing, but also the benefits in a tangible way is an important part. So I actually wanted to connect this to a concept called range, and then looking at these sustainability issues, how can we actually address it? How can we come together and address it? First of all, because of these challenges that we are facing that are not traditional, that we haven't seen before, or just feeling but not seeing as intense as now, there's this concept of wicked learning environments. So there are two types of learning environments. One of them is wicked, and then the other side is the kind learning environments. It's actually corresponding to these wicked problems concept, where we are seeing increased number of issues, the ones that we're seeing in the food industry, the one that we are seeing in overall climate change, or the water use, or those complex challenges and then contemporary challenges that we're facing. I think these wicked issues also require wicked issues that are leading to wicked learning environments, and wicked environments need alternative approaches. And then one of my favorite books, David Epstein talks about this range. So this book is actually talking about the literature on the left, basically coming from psychological science, where they discuss wicked learning environments as environments where problems are complex, unpredictable, or lack clear solutions, making traditional expertise often insufficient. And then usually these wicked environments where we see wicked issues require adaptability, creativity, ability to synthesize information from different fields. So in short, they're discussing the need for generalists, and then how generalists can actually provide a lot of value in these issues. So I would definitely suggest you go and read, or if you're interested, because they talk about these coming together and then combining different fields, because these silos have been created for the past century and two. But before we actually created the science, the field, the scientific method, by just looking at everything, math, the astronomy, and medicine, right? So talking about range and having people or organizations that can deal with the variety of issues at the same time. I also wanted to talk about the importance of coming together and discussing these issues. And it's actually highlighted in this documentary from 2021. It's called Solutions, where they brought together experts from different fields, the economists, social scientists, engineers, and then you'll see people discussing the contemporary challenges, complex challenges that the world faces right now in Santa Fe Institute. So I would definitely recommend. But takeaway is basically a lot of our issues are actually connected, and then they usually end up in equality issues, or some our economic model. So you'll end up seeing how connected these fields are, where we actually think that they're not connected. So just bringing it back to our food systems, when you look at different stages, right? The pre-production, production, supply chain, or consumption, we have all these issues that may be common, such as socioeconomic, social-cultural, or developments that we are facing. For example, the rapid increase of AI and innovation, and then new technological solutions to new problems. But just looking at the how complex this is, even though in this image it's not looking as complex because it looks very neat and divided. But when you get into it and then start discussing a specific issue, you'll see that all of these stages and then the drivers and then all as well as outcomes that we are all interested in are very well connected. So it's another representation. It's basically a systems of systems, right? Food systems is a system of many systems. That's why I think it's important to understand how we can actually approach to food science and technology or agricultural systems with a systems of systems mindset. Systems science has been doing this for a while, but now it's, I think, time to apply those principles and then embrace it as food technologists. So just wanted to show you a very small problem that we're working on. I'm teaching currently systems thinking in food systems course, a graduate level course, but we are taking campus food waste as a case in this situation. Our students come up with ideas, but how complex it can get even for a small very geographically constrained area of one university, one system, basically campus food systems, and then one problem, basically food waste, food loss and waste, right? Food waste issue. But it can get so complex. And this is just showing the drivers and the outcome. So in the next iteration, actually students came up with additional connections and then that complex. So it can get very hard to communicate, it can get very hard to analyze. So I would like to just give one idea or like just example from how system thinking can be applied. We all know food waste is a huge issue. We can actually feed old people who are food insecure by reducing the food loss and waste issue or addressing this issue. So looking at packaging, for example, we don't think about packaging as something good usually, right? As consumers. But coming from the packaging and then food processing and engineering side, having worked on that for a while, I can say that packaging can actually provide a lot of value to our food system. So even Refed, in their, one of the leading food waste organizations in the US, came up with their solutions as top solutions to overall food loss and waste reduction and emissions reduction, package design, standardized late labels, active intelligent packaging, and portioning. But we also are facing with these material related impacts, right? There are two different impacts, food and material. So how can we actually bring together? So I like this research actually that came out in 2017. What they did is they combined life cycle assessment of studies, basically metrics of food products compared to their packaging. So this is packaging relative environment impact. So the higher the PREI, it's basically the higher the packaging impact compared to the food impact, environmental impact. I think this is based on just greenhouse gas emissions. So when you look at, for example, meat, you'll see that packaging impact is very lower compared to in other product. For example, for wine, that we have like very heavyweight glasses compared to its product, which is wine with a lot of water content in it, compared to meat with where we spend a lot of resources into producing. So just understanding these nuances and how to shift our mindsets in terms of evaluating these and then communicating these, I think becomes important. And my favorite part, I love IFT. I've been a dedicated volunteer since the beginning, I think more than 10 years ago when I joined, for food packaging division. Basically everyone embraced. And then after seeing how diverse the divisions were, the basically interest groups around the topics, and then having worked and collaborated with different divisions for a while, I realized, and along with, of course, my colleagues, we've been discussing these issues for a while. We thought, okay, there's all this great expertise, but why don't we have a division where we connect it all together, right? So where we discuss these interdisciplinary topics, where we actually collaborate. Normally, you can collaborate among divisions, but it's usually based on topics, or it's usually based on webinars or session submissions, but can we actually come together and then have these critical discussions around these collaborative and then interdisciplinary issues? So IFT, through this I think structure, is at an excellent point of time where it has all these different minds that are passionate and concerned about the future of the world. Why don't we bring together the expertise and then have discussions? So, but the IFT Sustainable Food Systems Division was basically came basically from that idea of let's bring everyone together around sustainability. Let's talk about sustainability. Let's develop capacity in our profession. Let's assess it. Let's look at it, what's missing, and communicate that. And we've been, I think the division officially started in 2020, where we started discussions 2018, but currently we are on our third year. I served as a chair for 2 years, but now I am a past chair. So Franny Gilman is our new chair, and then Jonathan Call Kershaw is our chair-elect. So we have a turnover of leadership also. We have new members and new volunteers, and we are basically continuing our conversations around how to move the needle forward. So when we ran a assessment with our members, we actually saw that people members of IFT were very much interested in quantifying and defining sustainability, processing innovations, United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, because I think there's a lot of curiosity around that, novel ingredients, of course, because of the nature of our society, and then overall social impacts, and then descending order, different aspects. And then also people were very interested in webinar and then podcasts and presentations at IFT first, and some fireside chat. So we actually run these evaluations continuously. But also as an overall, perspective, just understanding what the future awaits based on these needs. We need knowledge sharing, we need capacity building in the field, understanding where we are at in terms of our sustainability education, in terms of our professionals in the industry. Do we really understand what sustainability is, how they can be materialized? Do we actually collaborate? We talk about, I think this is one of the challenging portion. Everyone understands the role of collaboration, but when it comes to collaboration, things can get very interesting. And I think somebody needs to teach us how to collaborate. And one of the ways is basically continuing to collaborate no matter what, right? So for example, collaborating with social scientists can be challenging with engineers, for example, or vice versa, right? So understanding that common language and what that means, and having patience, I think is important. And also science-based solutions, because we should, and then we must continue developing these solutions so we can actually continue communicating them. And IFT is at a great place, great time, where we come together, and then and where we can share our expertise. So one of the things that I'm doing, for example, is just one of our projects is capacity workforce development. So we train students, undergraduate students, on circular economy and digitalization at the same time, because those are both emerging concepts that will require us to be, I think, knowledged at. And one of the reasons we're running this program over the summer, so it's a 5-year program, and then we train students for 10 weeks. We go to different circular businesses and then have a training program while students conduct their research. I think it's a great model. And in Europe, there are examples like Erasmus programs or other research exchange programs, which should continue. So some of the references, and I'm really excited to continue having conversations around this topic. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Hey, thank you very much, Ziynet, for sharing all that experience. Very fascinating by the waste project on your campus. I'm sure you can tell us much more about that as we go into discussion. So for those who have joined since we started, please put your questions in Q&A. And after our next speaker, we'll go into questions and answers and discussion. So please write them in there, and I will monitor what's happening there. So onto our second speaker, João Brites. He's Director of Growth and Innovation at HowGood, which is a software as a service platform that helps food companies measure, improve, and report their social and environmental impact. Prior to joining HowGood, João served as a Global Director of Sustainable Development at AB InBev and was a co-founder of award-winning impact ventures, including Movimento Transformers, the Amazon Summer School, and Carbono Biodiverso. So he's got a lot of experience in this area, and you'll probably also learn that he's a breakdancer and a scuba diver, but more of that on another day. So João, please, over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Colin, and thank you, Ziynet, and hello everybody who are joining us from all over the world. I'm really delighted to be talking with you about topics that are so dear to my heart: sustainability, food systems, and what I think is also the untapped superpower of food technologists. So I'm going to start screen sharing, and I hope it's sharing the right screen, and I will assume so. If not, you'll be very kind and let me know. But during today's presentation, to tell you a little bit about me, besides being Director of Growth and Innovation at HowGood, I'm also a small-scale agroforester. For those who don't know about agroforestry, it's a way of managing land where you combine annual crops with tree crops. I'm also a dancer. I've been a dancer for a long time, and also a recreational scuba diver. And I think what cuts across all of these passions is a desire to regenerate life, to regenerate human life, and to regenerate, hopefully, biosheds and ecological landscapes. So during the presentation today, I want to start by sharing what I think is the greatest challenge of our century. And I think it really goes in the segue of what Ziynet just shared. Then I'm going to talk about what I think is a superpower of food technologists and how it relates to the idea of creating landscapes through food. And then I'm going to be inviting you to this conversation about what does it take to activate that superpower for regeneration, and share a little bit about the story that we have here at HowGood and why we created it. So starting with the greatest challenge of our century, and I actually have a couple of questions and pictures that I'd like to start with. So can anyone write in the chat, what is that white dot in this picture? Can anyone guess? If so, write in the chat. Yes, Bertrand, that's planet Earth. That's planet Earth. And that picture was actually taken in 1990, the year I was born, by Voyager, when it was really on the edge of the solar system. They turned the camera of Voyager to take one last picture of planet Earth at a distance of 3.7 billion miles from the sun. And that's what they saw. And just notice how everything we love, almost everything we know, is right there in that pale blue dot. And if you zoom in, this is what you see. This is another picture. This is one that's called Earthrise. It was described as one of the most influential environmental photographs ever taken, because it was one of the first times that we actually saw planet Earth from the outside. And look how beautiful she is. And that's it, right? That's us. That's our home. Now, if you zoom in, and if you were to kind of ask planet Earth, hey planet, how are you doing? If you were to take an X-ray or assess the vital signs, you would conclude that, what actually intuitively we kind of know, that the planet Earth is not doing so well. This is a framework that I particularly like. It's called the donut of social and planetary boundaries. And this framework brings what Ziynet was just presenting, which is the concept of planetary boundaries, which are the outer circle here, with the concept of social boundaries, right? The minimum social standards that everyone should have access to. And what you can see here in this framework is in the inner circle, you find the basic human needs like water, food, health, education. And in red, that's the percentage of people in the world population that do not have access to that life's essential. And on the outer circle, you see the planetary boundaries. And these are basically the biological, geological limits of planet Earth to support life. And these are the Earth life support systems that we cannot afford ourselves to overshoot. And the conclusion of these X-ray, if you will, is that we're failing on the biggest challenge of our century, which is to meet the needs of every human alive within the means of the planet. And as Ziynet also shared, the food system plays a very strong role across many of these boundaries. 26% of global greenhouse gas emissions are associated with food production. If you look at one of the other planetary boundaries, which is the integrity of our biosphere, 40% of global biodiversity loss is driven by expansion of agricultural land for food production. 78% of ocean and freshwater eutrophication, which is a fancy word for pollution caused from the nitrogen runoff, is caused by food production. And if you look at even a social boundary, like the social boundary of decent income and work, 1.2 billion people are employed in agri-food systems and 2.6 billion live in their households. So if there's an insight that comes from this, is that if we don't solve the food system, if we don't transform our food system, our ability to meet those planetary boundaries and to live within those planetary boundaries and meet all of those life's essentials is definitely going to be impossible. And this really brings me to this question of, okay, what is then the role of food technologists? Okay, food industry has a big role. What is the role that individually each one of us could have? There is a research paper from McKinsey that I really like and talks about this analysis that they've done, where they discovered that the research and development stage typically accounts for 5% or less of the total cost of the product, but it actually influences 80% of the resource footprint. And so the key takeaway from this is that the R&D stage is often the most cost-effective stage to address the resource footprint of products. And so what this means in practice is that things like ingredient choice, what you put in your food formulation, matters. The emission factors of food production are highly variable, and it's a complex science, and there's a lot of variability in the emission factors for the same commodities. But you can see that the average emissions factor for something like beef, it's closer to the 60 kilos of CO2 equivalent per kilo finished product, while for another source of protein like peas is actually much closer to 0 or 1. So ingredient choice matters. But it's not just ingredient choice, it's also ingredient diversity. On the left-hand side, you can see how an example of a typical monoculture that are now widespread across the globe. As many of you may know, 75% of our calorie intake comes from only 12 crops and 5 animals. And nearly 50% is just from 3 crops: rice, wheat, and maize. And if you think about what that does to our agricultural landscapes, if we have homogeneous food, we're driving and incentivizing homogeneous landscapes. But on the other hand, if you look to the right-hand side, if we recognize that there are more than 300,000 edible plant species and more than 7,000 have been cultivated for food, look at the potential of flavor, of nutrition, of regeneration that can be possible when we work with more ingredients. And so biodiverse food also drives biodiverse landscapes. And when you take into consideration that as much as 46% of the world's habitable land is used for agriculture, then in fact what this means is that food technologies, they don't just create food. Food technologies create planetary landscapes. Because for every food product that you're creating, there is an invisible link, a transmission mechanism between the product you're designing and bringing to life and the ecological reality of the place that is growing those ingredients. And if this superpower exists, if this superpower is real, then a superpower doesn't mean much if we can't activate it, if we don't use it. And some of the reasons why we've seen many food technologies not using the superpower is not for indifference, is not for apathy. Actually, a lot of the food technologies that we speak to have this desire, this craving, this calling of being part of positive change. But it's often, lack of data. It's really difficult to kind of measure the footprint of food products for different types of processes and different regions and different agricultural practices, especially at the R&D stage, where you're just conceptualizing that product. Second, it's the resource intensity. A traditional life cycle assessment can cost easily $100,000, take more than a year to complete. And the innovation environment is much more dynamic and agile than that. And the third one is the accounting complexity. The rules, even for people that make this a full-time job, the rules around sustainability accounting are complex, are constantly evolving and changing, and it is really difficult to stay up to date on something that can look as simple as calculating a product carbon footprint. And that's why, 17 years ago, we created HowGood. We created HowGood and raised $24 million in the process to hopefully address some of these challenges and help food technologies measure, improve, and communicate sustainability impact of food products. Our database includes assessments for over 33,000 different food ingredients, chemicals, and materials. We've evaluated over 2 million consumer goods. And our purpose is to bring the power of automation to a lot of this work. And there are many food technologists across, some of the world's leading food companies that are using HowGood. And what we've done was to create a SaaS platform, as Colin mentioned, that allows food technologies during the research and development stage, during the manufacturing stage, during the go-to-market stage, constantly measure, improve, and communicate the sustainability impact of food products. So to show you an example here, you're seeing a meatball. You can see the carbon footprint as reported in our platform, the water footprint, the land footprint. And you can see, for example, in the carbon life cycle that the agricultural stage accounts for 90% of the emissions of these meatball. You can see the breakdown per each ingredient. You can see that beef, for example, is driving a lot of the emissions, and you can click edit. And just with the click of the button say, okay, what if I replace uncooked beef? And let's keep it simple for now. And let's say we replace it by soy protein. What happens? And you can see immediately the changes that happen and see, for example, for carbon footprint, a reduction in 22 kilos. So this is more than 90% reduction, a huge reduction on blue water footprint and land footprint. And so the idea is to make these assessments as automatic as they possibly can be, so you can focus on actually building food products that are regenerative by design. And the thing that for me is really mind-blowing is that based on our experience, as food technologists design and communicate formulations that have improved impact, like an improved carbon footprint, an improved water footprint, consumer demand for those products rises. Ziynet was talking about how she's working within campus with food waste. We also actually have a partnership with Chartwells, where Chartwells basically is the food service provider for a lot of the dining halls in US universities. And what we've done with Chartwells was to help them communicate in their menu boards which products had a low carbon footprint. And what we found out after 1 year of working with them is that as you report to students which meals have low carbon footprint, climate-friendly recipes grew 37%. And so again, it's not that people are indifferent or apathetic. It's just that, from an information perspective and data perspective, we need to make it easy for people to make hopefully the right decisions. And so I think, to summarize, I think a lot of the challenges that, both Ziynet and I started talking about initially, about greenhouse gas emissions, water pollution, like they can really feel overwhelming at times. But I think what's beautiful about being a food technologist, working in the food system, is that you're operating in an industry that is an acupuncture point for the planet. And so the question is not even, does what I'm doing have an impact? Does food systems even relevant for the state of the planet and our human communities? The question is more, what impact do we want to have? Who do we want to become? What types of landscapes do we want to create as food technologists? So feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn and let's stay in touch. And I'm really excited to stay with you, Ziynet and Colin, for some Q&A round. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, João, and Ziynet again for those excellent presentations. And just a reminder to our audience, please put any questions you may have in Q&A so that I can monitor those and feed them through to our speakers. I think there was one question in there which I found interesting. I think probably both speakers could comment on this. From a systems perspective, what is the best approach to solving the nitrogen pollution problem, considering the need for synthetic fertilizers? Is it viable to forgo them altogether or in favor of organic or agroecological approaches? So Ziynet, I don't know whether you want to start on that one and then hand over to João.
Yes, of course. I think it's a huge problem here in Florida as well, because of our soil type, because of the nutrient runoff, right? Like it's a big problem, as we saw also in the planetary boundaries. But because it's a complex issue, it needs some systems thinking approach. One of them is, of course, integrated nutrient management, just combining the use of synthetic fertilizers with organic matter like compost or manure, or other technology solutions such as precision agriculture that actually calculates how much individual field requires and has in terms of the capacity. So applying that with such as GPS guided applications, smart agriculture technologies is one of them. Of course, agroecological practices like crop rotation, intercropping. I'm not an expert in this, so I can't really talk. Maybe João can talk about that since he's running a small, apparently a farm. And I'd like to hear more about that. But yeah, so policy, regulation, research, education, I think they're all a part of it to understand how we can actually get the most out of the fertilizers that we're using first. And then in the meantime, looking into these alternatives together, because cutting everything all together is not going to be the solution, similar to the coal mining or other non-renewable resource uses, for example, that we always talk about.
Okay. João, please.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question. And I think, for me, in my experience, I don't oppose to the use of, synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. I think especially when you're using it as a jump start to your farm, and maybe you are recovering degraded land, and that's maybe an input that you need. I think the issue that I'm concerned with from an agricultural perspective is often farmers, for them to be able to maintain the same yields over time, they need to rely on growing amounts of external inputs. And I think, one, that is not sustainable. Two, there could be even risks from a food security perspective. And so, in my view, I think a lot of the solution from an agricultural perspective kind of also is connected to use nitrogen fixing crops and trees. Because the thing about nitrogen, as you know, is that like it's widely available in our atmosphere when you apply it. It's not easily absorbed by plants. So there needs to be certain levels of soil health and bacteria in order to make that nitrogen available for plants. And so usually, if you don't rely as much on synthetic input fertilizers, which end up translating into runoff, you can actually rely more on nitrogen fixing crops. And so a lot of the crops that are from the leguminous family, like pulses, beans, they're actually natural nitrogen fixers. You also have trees that are nitrogen fixers. And so you can do a lot of the fertilization at the farm using nature-based solutions. And so I think, for me, the point is, is that even questioning the need of, synthetic nitrogen fertilizer? Do we actually even need it? I think if we need it, let's maybe use it to kind of jumpstart and help start a recovery process of agricultural land. But the process of relying on growing units of input is not sustainable over time. And it also harms the profitability of a lot of farmers who might not be able to pay for growing amounts of the synthetic fertilizer over time. So the more you can have your own solutions on your farm to create the inputs you need for the farm to thrive, then the better you will be, the more resilient will your farm be, and the more profitable you could be as well.
Okay, thank you for those very, very thoughtful full insights. And there are more questions in the Q&A, but I just wanted to pursue this sort of topic, because obviously that question, your comments from both of you have again raised the issue that Ziynet mentioned of collaboration and the challenges of collaboration. And I like your title, João, of the superpower of food technologists, but clearly we need to work with agricultural scientists, et cetera, et cetera. Would both of you like to share your experiences of collaboration and how we might drive greater collaboration, both nationally and internationally? I know in the early years of my own career, working for a food research council, we always felt the poor relative to the agricultural scientists in terms of funding. So I wonder if you both comment on that, and maybe Ziynet in particular, what changes do we need to see in the food science / food technology programs in being taught in universities that might bring greater focus and emphasis on these topics? So Ziynet, would you like to start?
Yes, of course. This is a topic that I'm very passionate about, because since I like to have range in different fields, so I have a background of processing, packaging, now looking into more systems perspective into these topics. But overall, I think one of the things is just don't judge your colleagues who are working on different projects or interested in different areas, because that may be natural, first of all, right? First of all, we need to just break down those barriers and then really eliminate the idea of domains, in my opinion. And then Donella Meadows, in her systems textbook and also book that's used by like thousands of people, right, on systems thinking, she talks about this issue, and she says, just eliminate the idea of domains. So can we actually do that first? And of course, we live in a modern world. We can't just do that. We can't just eliminate. We need chunks that we can manage, right? That's why we created all these domains in the first place. but can we actually increase these opportunities of cross collaboration and multidisciplinarity and have some sort of a common understanding of what it would look like, some of the challenges before we even start collaborations? Because like I mentioned, we have a food loss and waste project currently that we're working on. We have implementation partners, community partners, and social scientists, engineers working together. I think for a while we just discussed what a certain term would mean, and then I keep hearing the same things from other people, but understanding that this is a natural part of the process is a big I think big idea. Maybe we can start with, okay, this is normal, we're not used to collaborating, let's have an open mind and have a conversation around this. For the food science and universities overall, I think, like I said, having these projects that look ambitious but then lead to some tangible outcomes could be a good solution to begin with. But there's so many ideas, I think, which we can talk for hours about.
Okay, thank you. Ciao.
Yeah, I think for me, I distinguish between like collaborating just for the sake of collaborating, which can be fine, right? Versus kind of how do we engage in developmental partnerships where we engage in relationships that transform ourselves, and that as a result of that engagement, no one else will be the same. I think sometimes we approach collaboration as, look, this is what I have to contribute, but I don't go into the collaboration with the perspective of actually growing or developing myself. And I think the ones that are really powerful is like those where, like for me, in my case, like for me, when 4 years ago, I went to my first agroforestry farm and started noticing what does it mean to be in a relationship with a place. There was a kind of a deeper level. It was not just me, adding something to the farm. It was actually something deeper where I was contributing to the development of that place, and that place was actually contributing to the development of my own potential. And so I think for me, kind of it all starts with also approaching collaboration with opportunities for self-development, giving us the permission to be transformed by the relationships, the adventures we engage. And I think for me, part of like a collaborative arrangement that we've been part of HowGood has been like we've been working a lot on the eco-labeling system with retailers. And so collaborating with retailers to bring eco-labels so that consumers can make more informed choices. And when we started 17 years ago, there weren't standards. There aren't even unified standards now. Imagine 17 years ago. But there was that drive. We were united by a purpose, and there was that drive of let's do it. Let's focus on movement and experimentation and learning. And as a result of that, both our retail partners and also HowGood's offering has evolved immensely since then.
Okay, you must have been looking at the Q&A, because we've got a question here about what are the challenges with eco-labeling on pack, and does that drive positive purchasing behaviors? Obviously, it's not quite as simple, but it's complex. But João, you can come in on this one.
Yeah, I would say there is a part that is simple, another part that is complex, right? The part that is simple is if you do products that have positive eco-labels perform better from a sales perspective than products with bad eco-labels, regardless of how you measure it. Like the difference, like sustainability marketed products are definitely driving preference. We've been doing trials for 7 years in the US, in Europe, and all of those trials that we did in store, online, with electronic shelf labels, they all tell the same. As consumers have access to sustainability information, they opt more for more sustainable products. That's the simple part. For retailers, the equation is a little bit complicated, right? Because there is cannibalization, right? People move from certain products into others. And so whether that translates into A growth in profits is kind of a different conversation, but do consumers pick it if they have the information? For sure. Like, we're very confident about that. The thing that is complex is then, how do you measure sustainability? And so currently there are multiple systems to evaluate sustainability impact. There are more than 450 different eco labels out there. There are different sustainability rating systems for food. And so what we support from a HowGood perspective is some unification of these standards so that people can compare apples against apples. And the European Commission has committed to propose a mandatory front of pack sustainability labeling framework by end of this year. And so we're definitely supporting that, contributing as we can, but also saying we can't wait to have uniformization because the planet's clock is ticking. And so let's start with what we have. Let's work towards unification, but let's not wait for unification to start, because action is urgent.
Okay, thank you. Ziynet, would you like to add anything to that?
I think the importance of also consumer perceptions is really important compared to how sustainability is evaluated, because consumers come to shopping or like overall with a preconceived notion of what sustainability is, or how much of a sustainable how sustainable of a product is, I think, before they even come. So maybe the packages they see only strengthens their perception. So this is a very complex, and I wrote a paper about the consumer considerations of packaging sustainability, but not only labels, but other product itself or how packaging looks will communicate sustainability. So understanding those combined perspectives, I think, is important. And not only the eco labels, but how brand or the colors and packaging, the materials will communicate sustainability is going to contribute to that perception.
Yeah. I mean, during your presentation, Ziynet, you mentioned greenwashing. I don't know whether you can give a few examples of where you've seen that, and João may have some as well.
So yeah, several brands using the color green is one of them. Using the leaf symbol, right? Just, physical or like visible actually cues for doing this. And then one of the ways of greenwashing can be not actually measuring sustainability in any way, and then just letting consumers or people who purchase the products to come up to their own conclusion. I don't know. It can be very misleading in this. I'm not an expert in greenwashing, obviously, but there are many studies too. So that was very surprising to us when we were looking into this. There are a couple of reports talking about this, but generally speaking, I don't think there are many people working on this area, which I think we should definitely work on.
Okay. João, any comments on that?
No, yeah, I think completely agree with Ziynet. I think other examples of greenwashing that I've seen are, for example, connected to making forward-looking statements with no action plan to meet them. That's extremely common. A lot of companies making sustainability targets. Also, there are other ones that are related, for example, to, the biodegradability claim, which is used a lot, and sometimes it doesn't reflect the actual use cases that people do to those bags. And so, for example, if your biodegradability claim depends on exposure to oxygen and oxidation, well, if it goes to a landfill, maybe it's not going to be biodegradable. And if that's what's most likely going to happen, then you shouldn't be really making a biodegradable claim. Another one, very common, recyclable. And recyclable where? Are there recycling facilities nearby? How much you would have to walk or to drive? How much time would it take for you to recycle that? And so the recyclable, there is a lot into it. And so I think that's also why, going back to that point of having agreement on from the regulatory authorities like the Federal Trade Commission on green for the green guides, and the European Commission in the EU on what those claims should mean and measure is so important.
Okay, thank you. Just a change of topic here. You've been asked by one of our colleagues, what are your thoughts on cultured meat vis-a-vis sustainability? Any comments?
Well, I'm a food engineer, so I wouldn't say no to any technology solution to a problem. But overall, I think it's important to really understand what type of which segment we are creating alternatives to, because I think in one of the recent studies, run studies, basically meat alternatives, where I'm not talking about culture meat, but oral meat analogs, were not replacing the actual meat, but replacing other, ready to eat products or other, segments, which was really interesting to me, because the overall idea was to somehow replace the consumption of meat, but it ended up not impacting anything at all, and the meat consumption is still increasing. So understanding the actual value, and then whether or not consumers will actually opt for it, could be a good option, but it's an option. So that's why I like these different, alternatives. But for a general purpose change, I'm not really sure that it's the solution, because of the impacts associated with it, because of how complex the production is, because of the resources that needs to go into this. It's similar with the controlled environment agriculture systems, where we grow foods indoors without utilizing sunlight. Maybe if you talk about, for example, greenhouses, but the other systems may not work well for certain regions. So I would say maybe there's no one size fits approach, but it needs to be evaluated on a case by case basis, for region to region, or consumer to consumer basis.
Okay. Joe, any comment on that one?
Yeah, I think Ziynet is spot on, and I was a bit concerned with the kind of the regulatory move in Italy of forbidding cultured meat. I think, like, if anything, for systemic change to happen, we're going to have lots of acupuncture points and lots of solutions happening in different places. And for some, cultured meat might be, potentially, when it's developed at scale, actually an affordable alternative for the consumption of meat. And so if that day arrives, why removing us that solution from our toolkit?
Okay. And Jean, I think this question may be to you first. What are the primary challenges or barriers that currently hinder the widespread adoption of agroforestry plus food forestry as a method for global food production? And how can those challenges, barriers be addressed? Simple question for you.
Oh boy, don't get me started there. But look, I think, like, for me personally, there are two key gaps. The first one is the knowledge gap. If you go to most agronomy schools, almost anywhere in the world, what you're going to learn is monocultures. Like, there is very little teaching of agroecology, of agroforestry whatsoever. And so I think first is really the gap of knowledge, because we're not teaching that at a lot of the universities out there. And I think the second one is the mechanization gap. A lot of people say, well, agroforestry is labor intensive. Well, it's labor intensive because we don't have machines for it, because the machines that were developed for the agricultural ecosystem were developed for large monocultures. They are house-like, and they are not applicable in an agroforestry environment. But that doesn't mean that agroforestry is not mechanizable. It can be. We just need to develop solutions that are fit for that purpose. And there are a lot of pilots that are being done, especially in Brazil, where I've worked for 5 years, on developing mechanization appropriate for agroforestry. So I think if you actually close those two gaps, the knowledge gap and the mechanization gap, it could actually be widespreadly adopted. And I think the third thing is, the other gap I would add, on the run now, is, like, currently farmers are not paid for the ecosystem services that they provide. And I think farming is not just about producing food. It's about producing clean air. It's about producing healthy soils. It's about producing a beautiful landscape. And all of those ecosystem services are not reflected on what we're paying farmers. And so if you actually do that, then agroforestries, food forests, they don't just become kind of, the right thing to do, but they become the easy thing to do.
So, and you've almost gone into another question. How can food systems create better incentives to support for farmers to choose more diverse crops and more regenerative practices? I mean, obviously, regenerative agriculture is a hot topic at the moment, but would you like to start on that, João, and then I'll go to Ziynet?
Yeah, I think a couple of thoughts, right? I think from a regulatory perspective, looking at our subsidies, for example, in the European Union, the Common Agriculture Policy, and making sure that those incentives are actually paying for the right things. Where currently a lot of the payments in the agricultural landscape in the EU are based on acreage. But what does it mean, for example, if you start paying at least part of that money based on environmental outcomes? So I think better incentive starts with agricultural subsidies. It also starts with a lot of companies giving, just recognizing that a lot of farmers are financially insecure, and for them to make a transition from a conventional agricultural system to a lot of the regenerative agriculture systems that we've been discussing. It requires investment, it requires capital, and the farmer shouldn't have to bear that risk alone. And so a lot of the companies, the producers, should, for example, through long-term buying contracts, ensure that farmers have the stability of income they need to make that transition. Just some two ideas to get started. I'd love to get yours.
Ziynet, any comments on that?
So just overall, I think carbon markets, how carbon markets are being evolving right now is a good example. So can we actually have a common understanding of that? And then can we actually put emphasis on that? But also, it's important not to be just carbon focused, and then not hyper focused on certain regions like Europe or just the US, right? We are producing food everywhere in the world. So looking at India, China, general countries in Africa, for example, but intensification activities happening. And then just as we grow more, looking into economic growth, can we actually rethink our economic growth systems, and then what we are valuing and what we are awarding in terms of that. I think it's just a question of overall systems, right? When you look at the iceberg model, you'll see that a lot of the issues come from the bottom of the iceberg, like how people think, how people actually systems have patterns, right? So think about these underlying causes of our economic system, of how we value different concepts.
Sure. And final question, because we're rapidly running out of time. And this questioner asks, are there sustainability levers or opportunities at the processing stage? And how do you view direct supply chains versus conventional ones? I think direct means more local, more regional. Ziynet, would you like to start that one?
Yes. So I think looking into resources overall is a good opportunity, but that's what food industry has been focusing on for a while. Energy use, right? Reducing the energy use means reducing the costs. So can we actually connect more sustainable options or technologies to reduce costs, increased maybe return of investments, connecting it to some sort of a business case at the current, economic paradigm would be, I think, one of the biggest opportunities. And then overall, we are actually planning a workshop in April as part of the American Society of Agriculture and Biological Engineers Circular Bioeconomy Systems Initiative, just on food processing and packaging and overall food loss and waste. Some of the topics that came up were related to water reuse. Can we actually look at water resources and how we can actually create the sustainable use of water, sustainable reclamation of water? And then also looking into electrification technologies. Can we actually look into these perspectives that we normally don't in the food industry? Because I think one of the biggest reasons of this is we don't plan for longer term horizons. We plan for 1 year, 5 years. Not 5 is a miracle probably, but beyond 5 years, we don't really talk about our organizations and food industry overall.
Okay, well, thank you both for sharing, well, firstly, the gift of your time today and sharing your clear expertise in this area and passion and interest in it. It's been, I think, most rewarding for all of us listening into you, of your perspective. So thank you very much for that. We greatly appreciate it. I'm sure people will have noted your emails, etc., and will be in touch afterwards. And I think we've managed to answer all the questions, but if any further ones come in, we'll email them to each of you to respond. And for those who've registered today, obviously a recording of today's webinar will be available. So again, it will give you further opportunity to relook at some of the fascinating data and slides, and the focus, obviously, as both speakers indicated, needs to be on data and good solid data to make sensible decisions. Before we I close the webinar, I just wanted to alert viewers and participants that the British section will be holding its next event on February the 1st next year, 2024. This is going to be our annual Binstead lecture, which will be a face-to-face meeting when the current IFT president, Sean Layton, will speak on future-proofing the food system. So again, something that's highly relevant to today's event. And although it's a face-to-face event in London in collaboration with our Food and Drink Federation and our Institute of Food Science and Technology, we hope to be streaming it around the world. So hopefully other people will be able to dial in and listen to what's going on. And also our plan for 2024 is to have probably a couple more webinars on sustainability topics, maybe diving a little deeper into specific areas like alternative proteins and so on. But thank you all again to joining us today, and especially to our two speakers, Ziynet and João. Greatly appreciate it, and have a great rest of the day to everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye.
See you, everybody.
Section.